The last time anyone saw him alive, the sun was sinking behind the pines and the lake was turning the color of old copper. He waved at a group of strangers on the trail, smiling, tired, but excited for his first solo camp of the summer. His tent was already pitched near the waterline, a perfect spot with a perfect view. No one could have guessed that within hours, he would be fighting for his life against something no one could explain. The wind picked up around midnight, carrying a strange whistle that didn't sound like wind at all. It was rhythmic, almost like someone humming through clenched teeth. He sat up, unzipped his tent a little, and peeked outside. Nothing but darkness. No footsteps. No branches snapping. Just the uneasy feeling that he was no longer alone. The campfire he had put out earlier was flickering back to life, even though the wood was drenched from the lake mist. He stepped out barefoot, thinking maybe another camper had wandered too close and accidentally rekindled the flames. But the moment his foot touched the cold soil, he froze. There were footprints around the fire pit. Not large, not small, just wrong, angled in a way that looked painful, as if whoever walked on them didn't understand how human feet were supposed to work. He called out, a soft but nervous, "Hello." That melted into the trees without an answer. The forest didn't echo back. It swallowed his voice whole. Even the insects seemed to stop, leaving the world too quiet for comfort. That was when he saw it, a shape standing deep between the birches. Not moving, not hiding, just watching him. The only sound was the water tapping gently at the shore behind him. He backed toward his tent, hands trembling, eyes locked on the figure. For a moment he thought it was just another camper trying to scare him. But its silhouette was too long, too narrow, almost stretched. And when a thin gust of wind blew through the branches, the figure didn't sway. Everything around it moved, except the thing itself. His breathing turned shallow, chest tight, but he forced himself to step closer to the firelight. That tiny glow was the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing the space between them. He blinked once, and in that single heartbeat the figure shifted its position, now closer, leaning impossibly sideways, its head tilted like it was studying him. He stumbled backward, nearly falling into his tent as panic finally took over. His flashlight shook in his hand, the beam jittering over the trees until it caught the figure again. This time, it wasn't standing. It was crouched low, fingers digging into the bark of a birch tree, leaving long, deep marks as it slowly dragged itself upward. The scraping sound was soft, deliberate, and far too calm for something so monstrous. He tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat. The last thing he remembered was the tree groaning under the weight of the thing climbing it, the branches bending, snapping, and the figure leaning down toward him from above, its face hidden in a darkness deeper than the night around it. Then everything went black, leaving only the echo of his final breath mixing with the cold wind off the lake. Cars drifted into the dimly lit rest stop throughout the night, their headlights cutting brief tunnels through the fog before disappearing again. Nobody paid much attention to the little girl holding tightly to her mother's hand, just another family returning from a long summer vacation, exhausted and eager to get home. The mother guided her daughter toward the restroom while the father filled the tank, unaware that the woods behind the building were still whispering from the horror of Echo Lake, only 15 miles away. Inside, the bathroom smelled faintly of bleach and cold tile. A flickering, fluorescent light buzzed overhead, fighting a losing battle against the shadows in the stalls. The girl hesitated, glancing back at her mother, who gave her a reassuring smile and waited near the sinks. She pushed open the far left stall, the only one with the door slightly ajar, and stepped inside. The lock clicked behind her, echoing too loudly in the empty space. As she sat down, she heard someone crying. Soft at first, like a whimper carried through a tunnel. Then clearer, closer. A woman's sobs, shaking and uneven. The girl slid her feet up onto the seat, suddenly afraid the sound might be coming from the next stall. When she leaned forward to look under the divider, her heart hammered against her ribs. There were legs there, bare, pale legs, but they weren't touching the ground. They hovered inches above it, toes pointed downward like a marionette suspended by invisible strings. She stared, frozen, until the crying stopped abruptly. Silence pressed hard against her ears. Then the legs began to drift sideways, gliding instead of stepping, the empty stall door slowly creaking open without any footsteps to accompany it. The girl slapped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. The temperature dropped so fast she could see her breath floating in the air. The girl unlocked her stall and bolted out, her small shoes screeching across the tile. She kept her eyes glued to the mirror in front of her, because something in her gut told her not to look behind. And in that reflection, she saw a woman standing in the far stall, shoulders shaking, long wet hair covering a face she didn't want to see. But the worst part was the woman's feet. They weren't on the ground. They hung inches above it, gently swaying as if moved by water instead of air. Her mother turned just in time to see the girl's face drain of color. "Sweetie, what happened?" she asked, grabbing her shoulders. The girl pointed at the mirror, but the figure was gone, leaving only the faint ripple of movement, like someone slipping out of sight. The mother walked toward the stall, pushing the door open. Empty. Still, the faucet beside them burst to life, water gushing as though someone had slammed it with force. CCTV later would show the girl emerging from the stall and staring directly into the mirror, her lips moving as if speaking to someone standing beside her. But on the footage, no one was there. Only her reflection, and a faint shadow that lingered behind her for a moment too long. Security replayed the footage dozens of times, trying to explain the glitch, but the shape never fully disappeared. It clung to the corner of the screen, flickering like a forgotten face trying to surface. By the time they left the rest stop, the girl kept her head down, burying her face in her mother's side and refusing to look back at the restroom building. She didn't say a word until they were back in the car, the doors locked, the headlights stretching over the empty road ahead. Then, with a trembling voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Mom, she asked me if I saw him too." Her mother didn't know what she meant, but the girl pointed out the window, toward the dark road leading back to Echo Lake, where the first disappearance had happened only hours before. The couple checked into their Airbnb just after sunset, dragging their luggage across the narrow hallway of the 15th floor. They had driven for hours, passing the same rest stop where a terrified family had fled only the night before, but they didn't know that, not yet. All they wanted was a quiet night, a soft bed, and a view of the ocean from their balcony. The city lights below flickered like restless fireflies, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. Too peaceful, almost, like the calm that comes right before a storm. Sinks its teeth into the night. They ordered takeout, watched a movie, and tried to pretend the strange tension in the air was just exhaustion. But around 3 a.m., as the sound of distant waves blended with traffic, the first tap hit the balcony glass. A soft, measured knock. 1, 2, 3. The woman sat up instantly, her breath caught halfway in her throat. The man rubbed his eyes, annoyed, assuming it was just a bird or the wind. But the tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like a finger tracing a warning onto the glass. He pulled the curtains aside, expecting to see nothing more than an empty balcony. Instead, he froze. A shape, a person, stood outside, pressed against the railing. A tall, thin man with his head slightly tilted, as if examining the room with childlike curiosity. The couple stared, hearts hammering in their chests. 15th floor. No fire escape, no ledge, no reason for anyone to be out there. And yet there he was, leaning closer, his face blurred in the reflection like fogged glass hiding something far worse beneath. The man stepped back, whispering, "Call security. Now." The woman grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, but the moment she blinked, the figure outside shifted. 1 second he was at the railing. The next, he was crouched by the sliding door, hands spread on the glass as though trying to feel the warmth of the room. His posture was wrong, bones bent at angles that strained the limits of the human body, as if he were folding himself into a shape that didn't quite belong in this world. They backed away from the balcony, every instinct screaming to run, but fear pinned them in place. The tapping grew faster, more urgent, almost excited. Then, as the woman lifted her phone to film him, the figure vanished. Not stepped away, not ducked out of frame. He simply flickered out of existence like a TV channel cutting to static. Silence settled over the room, thick and choking. They didn't realize they were holding their breath until the phone slipped from her shaking hands. Security arrived 10 minutes later. They checked the balcony, the hallway, the roof access, nothing. No footprints, no handprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. But when the couple insisted on seeing the doorbell camera footage, the guards hesitated. Finally, they showed it. At 3:07 a.m., the exact moment the tapping began, the camera captured a pale face leaning directly into the lens. Eyes too wide, smile too thin, a face that didn't match any resident, any guest, any human expression they recognized. The next morning, as they packed in silence, the woman noticed something the security team had missed. On the balcony floor, near the sliding door, were faint streaks, marks that looked like dusty footprints. But they weren't leading toward the balcony from outside. They led inward, stopping abruptly at the doorway, as if something had stepped into the room, then disappeared before leaving a trace. They left the Airbnb without looking back, the ocean breeze brushing past them like a whisper. As they reached the street, the woman glanced toward the distant mountains, toward Echo Lake, toward the rest stop, toward the trail where someone had vanished only nights ago. She shivered, realizing the truth settling in her bones. Whatever was happening wasn't isolated. It was moving, following, and each person who encountered it saw a little more of its face. The hikers found the GoPro 3 days after the Airbnb incident, half buried under a fallen branch near a narrow trail in Oregon. They were a group of weekend adventurers, unaware that the same presence haunting the lake, the rest stop, and the balcony had begun drifting farther west, drawn to people who unknowingly stepped too close to its path. One of them, a tall guy named Mason, brushed the dirt off the device and frowned at the cracked lens. The last file was still intact, time-stamped only 12 hours earlier. They didn't know someone had vanished on that trail the night before. They gathered in a small circle beneath the shadows of the towering pines, the forest unusually silent as Mason played the video. It began innocently. Just a man hiking alone, laughing at his own jokes, talking about the sunset through the trees. But as the recording continued, his tone changed. The sky darkened faster than it should have. His breaths grew sharper. He kept turning the camera toward the tree line, muttering, "There it is again, I swear someone's following me." Leaves rustled behind him, but the crunching didn't match his steps. Something else was moving. The hikers leaned in, drawn helplessly into the raw fear bleeding through the screen. The man whispered, "Who's there?" Then swung the camera toward a cluster of trees. For a fraction of a second, there it was, something tall and thin, standing perfectly still between the trunks. The figure's limbs were too long, its outline distorted like a shadow stretched in the wrong direction. The video glitched, static tearing across the frame, as if the camera itself was terrified. When the image stabilized, the man was running. Branches whipped past him, the beam of his flashlight swinging wildly. He kept shouting that it was changing places, appearing in front of him no matter which direction he turned. The hikers exchanged uneasy looks. Mason tried to laugh it off, but his voice trembled. The forest around them felt tighter, the air thicker, as if the presence from the footage had seeped into the ground under their feet. In the final minute of the video, the man dropped to his knees, panting. He whispered into the GoPro, "If someone finds this, don't look at its face. Don't let it get close." Then he lifted the camera slowly, pointing it behind him. The figure stood only a few feet away now, its head bent so far to the side it almost brushed its shoulder. The distortion grew worse, bending the trees around it like heat waves. There was no sound, just a suffocating silence before the camera slammed into the dirt. The screen went black for several seconds. Then the audio returned. A faint dragging sound, something scraping across bark or bone. A wet breath, the man choking on a scream. And then nothing. The recording ended abruptly, leaving the hikers staring at their reflections in the dark screen, their blood cold in their veins. Mason shut off the GoPro, his hand shaking. "We should go back," he muttered, but no one moved. They all felt it, the same pressure in the air that had followed the missing man. A sense of being watched by eyes that weren't bound to one place, one body, or one world. Something was moving through the trees now, rearranging the silence, pushing the shadows toward them inch by inch. As they finally turned to leave the trail, a branch cracked deep in the forest behind them. Not from an animal, not from the wind. It was slow, deliberate, like long fingers curling around the trunk of a tree. They didn't dare look back. Not after seeing the face, or what little the camera allowed them to see of it. The presence was growing stronger, spreading farther, and every encounter made it bolder. It was no longer hiding. It was hunting. The bartender at the Coastal Inn wiped down the counter for the third time, uneasy without knowing why. Outside, lightning flickered over the ocean, illuminating brief silhouettes of fishing boats rocking in the rising waves. Tourists whispered about a strange storm rolling toward the coast, one that the weather service hadn't predicted. But the bartender had a different worry. A fisherman had stumbled in an hour earlier, soaked to the bone, trembling, insisting he'd seen something crawling across the water during his night haul. No one believed him. They should have. The fisherman sat alone at a corner table now, clutching a mug between shaking hands. His eyes were unfocused, fixed on something only he could still see. When the bartender approached, he finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "It was standing on the water," he whispered. "Not floating. Standing. Like the waves didn't matter." He tried to describe the figure, long, bent, shifting, as if the ocean were shaping it instead of the other way around. Every detail matched what had stalked the hikers, the couple, the child, the man at Echo Lake. The entity had reached the shore. As the storm hit, all power in the inn flickered. Phones buzzed with emergency alerts that abruptly cut off. The bartender looked toward the glass doors at the entrance. Something cast a shadow across the frosted pane, tall, impossibly tall, moving with the rhythm of the wind. The fisherman flinched so hard he dropped his mug. It shattered on the floor, the sound swallowed instantly by the thunder as he whispered, "It followed me." They locked the doors, but the wind battered the building like something hungry was pushing against it. The guests gathered in the lobby, huddled together as the lights strobed. Through each flash, the silhouette outside shifted, first near the door, then closer to the windows, then perched high on the roof as if listening for the exact moment fear peaked inside the inn. Children cried. Adults prayed. The fisherman covered his ears, shaking his head violently. "It's looking for someone who saw its face," he said. "It doesn't forget." A sudden crash from the storage room jolted everyone. The lights cut out, plunging the inn into suffocating darkness. The bartender clicked on a flashlight, the beam trembling as he swept it toward the sound. The storage room door was cracked open. Wind pushed through it, carrying the smell of the ocean, but the windows in that room had been boarded for the season. Something had forced its way inside, bending the metal nails outward like clay. The beam hit a trail of wet footprints leading out of the storage room. They were long and crooked, the same inverted pattern found at the Airbnb balcony. The bartender's heart slammed against his ribs. The footprints weren't leading into the room, they led out, weaving slowly into the lobby, stopping right behind the fisherman's chair. He hadn't moved. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on something above him, something only he could see in the dark. The wind suddenly stopped, completely, as if the world inhaled and held its breath. Then, faintly, a scraping sound traveled down through the vent above them, long fingers dragging across metal. Dust fell like ash. A woman screamed as the vent cover bent outward, warping from inside, as though something enormous were trying to squeeze through a space far too small. Before the vent gave way, the fisherman whispered one final confession, the kind spoken by a man who knew he was already dead. "It's not chasing people," he murmured. "It's following the places we've touched. Every time we tell someone, it gets closer." The vent snapped open, metal clattering to the floor. Cold air spilled down like the breath of something ancient. The lights flickered back for one final second, just enough to reveal a distorted silhouette unfolding from the ceiling, its limbs too many, its head turning toward the terrified crowd. Then darkness swallowed them whole. The emergency responders arrived at the coastal inn just after dawn, expecting a scene of flood damage and panicked tourists. Instead, they found the building eerily quiet, the doors unlocked, chairs overturned, and the faint smell of saltwater clinging to the air. Radios crackled with static as responders called out for survivors. No one answered. It was as if everyone inside had simply vanished. The only clue was a trail of warped, wet footprints that led from the lobby toward the beach, footprints that deepened and stretched unnaturally, as if whatever made them grew larger with every step. A search team followed the trail onto the sand, the wind cold and biting despite the rising sun. Driftwood lay scattered across the beach like discarded bones. The storm had passed, leaving behind an ocean too still, as if the water itself were holding its breath. At the shoreline, they found something half buried in the wet sand, the fisherman's jacket, torn down the back as though ripped open from the inside. Nearby lay a single boot, its leather warped as if exposed to extreme heat, even though the sand beneath it was cold. One of the responders, Ortiz, noticed shapes in the distance. At first he thought they were rocks washed ashore. But as he approached, his stomach tightened. They weren't rocks. They were fishing buoys, tangled around something human-shaped beneath the water's surface. He called for backup as he stepped closer, but the moment he reached the water's edge, the buoys drifted apart slowly, revealing nothing beneath them. No body, no debris, just dark water that seemed too deep, too quickly, as if the sand dropped off unnaturally at that exact spot. The responders retreated to reevaluate, shaken by the strange emptiness. Ortiz replayed the helmet cam footage he had taken minutes earlier. And that's when he noticed it. In the reflection on the water, just behind his own silhouette, something tall was standing. A thin, warped shape, its head bent sharply to the side. It was only visible for a single frame, but it was enough to send fear tunneling down his spine. He hadn't seen it in person, only on the recording, like the figure existed somewhere between the world and whatever lies just beyond it. By noon, news crews began to arrive. Reporters questioned the responders, demanding answers they didn't have. Rumors spread quickly. A gas leak, a structural collapse, a rogue wave. But Ortiz kept glancing toward the tree line, convinced the thing from the footage was still nearby. The shadows between the branches looked wrong. Too sharp in some places, too soft in others, shifting like something inside them was breathing. Later that afternoon, as responders expanded the search perimeter, a scream tore through the quiet. A young journalist from a local station had wandered too close to the storage shed behind the inn. By the time the team reached her, she was backed into a corner, pointing at the shed's roof. Her voice was shaking uncontrollably as she insisted something had been crouched on top of it, something tall, with limbs folded like an insect preparing to unfold. There were no prints on the roof, no marks, but her terror was real. And she kept repeating the same sentence. It knew I could see it, so it stopped hiding. The team moved her away, trying to calm her, but Ortiz felt another shift in the air. A pressure, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. He looked again toward the forest. The clouds above dimmed unnaturally, as though something had moved in front of the sun rather than the weather changing. The trees quivered without wind. He felt watched in a way that bypassed the eyes and crawled straight into his bones. That evening, as the investigation wrapped for the day, Ortiz reviewed more of the helmet footage with a higher zoom. That's when he realized the truth. The figure wasn't just watching him, it was following the responders, moving in short bursts between frames, closer each time the camera shook or turned away. The final frame before the camera cut out showed its hand, long, crooked fingers, resting on a tree behind him. He hadn't felt it, he hadn't heard it, but it had been there. And now it knew the faces of everyone who had searched the inn that morning. It knew their voices, their routes home, their fear. The disappearances weren't random, they were a pattern stretching across states, across stories, following those who had seen even a piece of it. And with each new witness, the creature grew closer to stepping fully into their world. Ortiz didn't go home that night. None of the responders did. They regrouped at a small operations center set up in a fire station 20 minutes inland, hoping distance would dull the chill they felt lingering around the inn. But the unease followed them. Radios flickered with bursts of static. Lights dimmed at random, and every so often, someone would swear they saw movement outside the station's frosted windows, shapes too tall to be passing pedestrians, too still to be tricks of the light. They tried to chalk it up to exhaustion. They knew better. By midnight, most of the team had settled into a restless silence. Reports were scattered across the table. Missing persons, unexplained footage glitches, a timeline stretching all the way back to Echo Lake. Ortiz traced the lines with his finger, noticing how every event connected like a web tightening toward the coast. "It's getting stronger," he muttered. No one argued. They all felt it in the thick air of that cramped room, in the way shadows clung too long to the corners, waiting. A sudden bang rattled the back door, echoing through the station. The responders jolted upright. Ortiz grabbed a flashlight and approached with another officer. Before they reached the door, the motion sensor lights outside flickered on, revealing nothing. No wind, no animals, just the empty parking lot stretching into the darkness. Then, faintly, a smear of wet footprints appeared beneath the doorway, the kind that shouldn't have existed so far inland. They weren't made by boots or shoes. They were elongated, uneven, almost skeletal. As they backed away, the station's generator sputtered. The lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, as though inhaled by something drawing power from the building itself. A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, not electrical, but organic, resonant, like a distant groan echoing from somewhere deep underground. One of the younger responders covered his ears, whispering, "It's here, it's already here," before collapsing into a chair, shaking violently. Ortiz steadied him, but the moment he touched his shoulder, the man flinched and pointed toward the far hallway. Every head turned. At the end of the corridor, just outside the glow of the emergency lights, a shadow stretched across the floor, longer than any human shadow should be, bending around corners as though it were alive. Slowly, it pulled back, retreating into the darkness. Not fleeing, waiting. The team scrambled to regroup, barricading the doors and turning off anything that might draw attention. They huddled together, breathing shallowly, straining to hear past their own pounding hearts. For a moment, the station was silent. Then came the scratching, light at first, like branches brushing a window. But there were no trees near the fire station. The scratching grew louder, traveling along the roof, then down the walls, as though something massive was circling the building, mapping every entrance, every weakness. One responder, a veteran named Harris, snapped. He grabbed a radio to call for outside help. The moment he pressed the button, the radio emitted a piercing shriek, drowning the room in static that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, as if something was breathing through the signal. The lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed them, heavy and smothering. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else tried not to cry. Ortiz clenched his jaw, holding his flashlight tightly, though he wasn't sure turning it on would help. Then, through the dark, a single sound cut through the chaos, the slow creak of the back door opening. The same door they had locked and barricaded minutes earlier. Cold air seeped in, carrying the scent of ocean brine, the same scent from the inn, from the beach, from every place the creature had touched. Footsteps followed, soft, measured, getting closer and closer. Ortiz lifted the flashlight with trembling hands and turned it on. The beam landed on the floor first, illuminating the warped footprints leading straight into the room, fresh, wet, dripping onto the tile. He followed the trail with the light, raising it inch by inch, until it stopped on something tall enough to blot out the hallway behind it. The creature's head hung low, its neck bent at an impossible angle, its limbs folding and unfolding as though it were deciding which shape it wanted to take. It didn't rush them. It didn't attack. It simply watched, its presence stretching the room thinner and thinner, like reality itself was beginning to tear around it. And in that moment, Ortiz understood. This wasn't a creature that wandered randomly. It followed stories, witnesses, memories. Every time someone spoke of it, saw it, or feared it, it grew. And now, after the inn, after the beach, after the footage, there were too many voices. Too many eyes. Too much fear feeding it. It wasn't hunting them. It was arriving. The forest swallowed the last of the orange dusk as the air grew unnervingly still, and Owen felt the silence press against his spine like a warning he was too slow to understand. Far behind him, the campsite lights flickered through the trees, tiny, trembling specks swallowed by the thickening darkness, but ahead, the narrow path seemed to curve into a black mouth of foliage. Every instinct told him to stop, to turn back, to pretend he hadn't heard the faint cry that had lured him away from safety. But the sound had been too human, too desperate, echoing through the valley like someone drowning in the shadows. And even now, as he strained to hear anything at all, the memory of that cry twisted inside his chest, urging his feet forward. He stepped deeper into the undergrowth, the leaves crunching like brittle bones beneath his boots. The forest felt wrong. Too cold, too dark, and the night insects that should have been buzzing were nowhere to be heard. Owen's breath fogged in front of him, unnaturally thick for a summer night, and each exhale felt like an intrusion into an atmosphere that didn't want him. His flashlight flickered, sputtering like a dying heartbeat, illuminating only the trunks of trees that looked older than anything he'd ever seen. The bark had strange, deep carvings, lines that didn't look like weathering or animal marks, but symbols. Intentional. Waiting. A branch snapped behind him, sharp as a gunshot, and Owen spun, raising the dim beam of his flashlight. Nothing. Only the dense curtain of trees. But his pulse throbbed wildly, and a cold sweat crawled down his neck. He called out, voice trembling more than he wanted to admit, the name of the missing hiker he thought he'd heard. The forest returned nothing, not even an echo. It was like the sound had been swallowed whole. He kept walking, telling himself he wasn't lost even as the path began to dissolve under the thick undergrowth. Thorny vines twisted around his ankles, tugging like small hands. The deeper he went, the more the symbols on the trees multiplied, appearing in strange spirals, circles, and jagged slashes. Some were fresh, some looked stained. Owen tried to convince himself they were carved by bored campers, but the patterns were too precise. Too deliberate. His stomach tightened as a faint metallic smell seeped into the air. A low hum vibrated around him, so soft he almost mistook it for the ringing in his ears. But the sound grew, slowly forming into a rhythmic pulse, like chanting buried beneath layers of earth. Owen froze. The air shifted. The forest seemed to tilt. His flashlight died with a sharp click, plunging him into total darkness. Only the distant chant remained, threading through the blackness like a whisper that knew his name. He fumbled backward, breath quickening as he tried to retrace his steps, but the trees no longer looked familiar. They seemed to shift subtly, closing ranks around him. A new sound emerged, a dragging footstep, slow and purposeful, moving somewhere just out of sight. Owen felt the air behind him grow colder, as if something tall had stepped into the space he'd just occupied. His heart thrashed against his ribs as he broke into a run, branches slashing across his arms and face. The chanting grew louder, closer, with each frantic step. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. All he knew was that something was following him, matching his speed, its breath scraping the air like sandpaper. The forest felt alive, hungry, closing around him like a trap that had been waiting all night for him to step into it. Then, through the darkness, Owen saw a faint light, a single, weak glow ahead, trembling between the trees. Hope surged through him, sharp and desperate. He lunged toward it, gasping for air. But as he got closer, he realized the light wasn't steady. It flickered like a lantern held by someone with a shaking hand. And just before he broke through the final thicket, the chanting stopped. The footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. The forest held its breath. And the light ahead of him dimmed, revealing a silhouette waiting in the center of the clearing, motionless, facing him. Owen's legs stilled as if rooted to the earth, every instinct screaming but unable to move. The silhouette lifted its head, impossibly slow, and even from a distance Owen could see that its eyes reflected the dim light like wet stones. It raised an arm, long, thin, wrong, and pointed directly at him. The forest seemed to exhale as a pressure crushed against his chest, and before he could scream, the lantern light flared, outlining dozens of figures emerging behind the first one, all of them wearing the same carved symbols on their skin.